Good evening, everybody, and I want to welcome you all to the World Handicap System overview. We are seeing a number of attendees still coming in right now. It is 5 o'clock, but what we will do is wait another 2 minutes to allow more people to come in and join us before we kick things off. So sit tight, and we will get started in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, everybody. First off, I want to take a moment to, on behalf of the Virginia State Golf Association, thank you all for registering for tonight's program and for spending the next hour with us. We hope you all are doing well, staying safe during these uncertain times, and hopefully we can take the next hour or so to learn a little bit more about this new World Handicap System that launched at the very beginning of 2020. Certainly was a project that was long in the making, and it finally released worldwide at the beginning of this year. So what we're going to do to kick things off this evening is just to set the agenda for tonight. And first off, we're going to start with a couple of introductions. I want to introduce first myself. My name is Michael Walder. I am the Director of Handicapping and Member Services for the Virginia State Golf Association. So I'm going to be doing most of the presenting this afternoon or this evening. But also with me is Connor Jones, and Connor is our Manager of Championships and Member Services. So he actually has a role in two different departments, running several of our competitions, which are currently on hold, and then also working with handicapping and course rating and other things related to membership. And Connor's going to serve as our moderator. So before we get any further along in setting the agenda for tonight, Connor's got a few just housekeeping announcements to make as it relates to questions and handouts and things like that. So Connor, if you want to take it away.
Sure, thanks, Michael. Again, just echoing Michael's words here, but thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this happy hour edition of our handicap review. But real quickly, just a couple of notes here. First of all, questions. We do want you guys to interact with us and ask questions. You can send them in at any time. You should see a control panel on your screen. It may have minimized by now. To bring that back up, you'll just need to press on the little orange arrow to bring your control panel back up, and you should see a text field to send in questions. So feel free to send them in now or throughout the presentation if you have one. There will be question slides, so when Michael gets to a question slide, we'll pause for a little bit and answer some questions and then move on. And secondly, there is a handout on the control panel as well. So if you look in the handout section, you'll see the WHS key changes PDF file. So if you click on that, you'll be able to bring up that key changes page. So if you wanted to kind of follow along with that and check that out as well, that would help. One other little side note, you may see the raise hand feature. If you have a question, just go ahead and send it in through the text. Don't worry about using the raise hand feature. You can ignore that. So if you have a question, either send it in now or send it throughout the show.
Great, thank you, Connor. And if we don't answer things that you're looking for this evening, education doesn't stop here at tonight's program. So certainly feel free to reach out to us offline as well. All right, so setting the rest of the agenda for the evening, we're going to talk a little bit about just give you a welcome to the World Handicap System, kind of give you a background of how it is that we got here. We'll get into the fundamentals in handicapping. We'll spend a few minutes on the handicap formula. Handicap formula has been tweaked a little bit for the new World Handicap System rollout. We'll go into some additional changes, and then we'll change gears and go into a topic that's a little bit more relevant right now. You may have seen some of the guidance that the VSGA as well as the USGA has sent out as it relates to handicapping and the rules of the game. Right now, we're probably, if you're playing golf, you may have experienced some changes in the way the game is being played at the facilities you've been able to get out to. And so we'll talk through some issues there and then focus a little bit, the last little bit on additional education. So we've got some good content hopefully for you this evening. And as Connor mentioned, we do have opportunities for Q&A. So don't hesitate to use that questions button. So let's start off with giving you an understanding as to how it is that we got to where we are with handicapping. Around the world, we have historically played by one set of playing rules, and that was co-administered or is co-administered by the USGA and the RNA, Royal and Ancient, which is out of St. Andrews in Scotland. But as it relates to handicapping, there have been 6 different systems in place around the world, and you can see a map of who those systems are and what jurisdiction they serve. So the USGA handicap system is the one that we've used in the United States, and the USGA handicap system is was actually around for over 100 years. So for more than 100 years, golfers in the United States have had a tool where they could go out on the first tee and figure out by using this system how to have an equitable match between players of differing abilities. It's one of those things that makes the game of golf unique, and so it's a great thing to have at our disposal. And before I get into the next piece, there are 5 other associations that administer handicapping as well. We've got CONGU, which is the Council of National Golf Unions, so that governed the UK and Ireland. The European Golf Association has a system, or had a system. Golf Australia, Argentina Golf Association, and the Republic of South Africa's Golf Association. So whereas, again, we were playing by 6 different sets of handicapping rules, we only had 1 set of playing rules. So the USGA and the RNA several years ago came up with this project to look into trying to create this unified world handicap system. And that's ultimately how we got to today's map. So now with the release or the launch of the world handicap system in January, we are now going to be governed by that single set of handicapping rules. Now, before I move on, the one logo that we've already referenced during the presentation, but is missing from the handicapping landscape is the RNA's logo. Now, the RNA has been around for many, many years, administering championships and many other things, the rules of the game, and so much more that they do for the game of golf, but this is their first foray into handicapping. And so collectively, the USGA and the RNA will be administering or leading this initiative. So when it comes to governance, and we're not going to bore you with too many of these kinds of slides, but just to give you an understanding, now the rules of handicapping are going to fall within one of the 4 pillars of the rules of the game. So we've got our rules of golf, the rules of amateur status, the equipment rules, and now the world handicap system will comprise the governance structure for the rules of the game. Now, what you can see from the second bullet point on this slide is that the World Handicap System will be comprised of the Rules of Handicapping and the course rating system. Now, one of the great things for us here in the United States is that when we transitioned to this new World Handicap System at the beginning of the year, one thing we did not have to make great changes in was our course rating system, because the rest of the world has adopted the USGA's course rating system as that means for rating golf courses. So what does that mean for us here locally in Virginia? It means that we did not have to get out in a rush and have to re-rate every single one of our golf courses. So you're going to see a lot, as we go through the new rules of handicapping in this new world system, you're going to see a lot of similarities to what we've had in place before with the USGA handicap system. And the reason being is that the underpinnings of this new system are really the USGA handicap system. Ultimately, we've taken the best elements from some of the other 5 existing systems around the world, but that base of this new world handicap system is going to be the USGA's handicap system. Focusing in on the book itself, you've got a screenshot there on the right of the slide of the new Rules of Handicapping book, which is now available. You can access a PDF version on our website, but if you want to order a hard copy, you certainly can from the USGA site. But the structure of the book is going to be very similar to the Rules of Golf, if you're at all familiar with that book. So instead of calling our rules sections as we had in the past in the USGA handicap system, we now refer to them as rules. And we have far fewer rules, down from 17 to just 7 rules of handicapping, along with appendices. So the structure of the book is very similar. You may notice if you get a copy that it reads a little different, and that's because it's written in international English. The italicized words, much like the rules of the game, are the definitions or key terms that are defined in the beginning of the book. We'll have blue box items that further explain the rule, and there'll be interpretations to provide practical implementation of a rule. The good news with the interpretations is they don't require a separate publication like they do from the rules standpoint. So that's just a brief overview of what the book looks like. And now let's jump into the purpose. And really the purpose hasn't changed that greatly. I mean, if you think about why we have handicapping to begin with, I already touched upon it. It's really to allow golfers of differing abilities to go out on the golf course, whether they're playing in a big tournament or just a group of 2 to 4 players, where they want to play against one another and have a match or have a game and have it be equitable. And they utilize this tool to be able to do that. So there are really 3 main bullet points that we're focusing in on when we talk about the purpose of the World Handicap System, and it's make it easy to obtain and maintain a handicap index. So a couple of words that are not on this slide are modern and inclusive. So as we progress throughout tonight's presentation, you're going to see that there are some new changes that have taken in some modern technology into account. And that we're trying to get more people involved in the handicap system and being a little bit more inclusive there. We want it to be easy for people to use their handicap index on any golf course around the world. We understand that not everybody travels abroad to play golf, but it's nice that when you make that trip of a lifetime to say Scotland and you're able to play a bunch of courses, that you will now be able to post those scores back to your handicap record. And probably most importantly, the third bullet point is that players can use this system to compete or play recreationally with anyone else on a fair basis. Okay, that makes sense. That would be our main purpose here with the new system. So I'm going to focus in on this slide on some key definitions that are new to the World Handicap System. These are terms that we did not have previously in the USGA handicap system, so they really should be new to you as it relates to the rules of this of handicapping. And the first term is going to be the low handicap index. The low handicap index is going to be the lowest handicap index achieved by a player over a rolling 365-day period. It's something that we've never really focused on before, but now that we have basically an upward limit of 5 strokes over the course of 12 months that a player's handicap can go up, we need to have a reference point by which we can look at that. And that figure is going to be called the low handicap index. So along those lines, as it relates to a limit in the upward movement of a handicap index, we have what's called both the hard cap and the soft cap. And we'll go into some greater example later on. But essentially, over the course of a 12-month period, that golfer's index can go up no more than 5 strokes. It can go down as much as it is possible, but 5 strokes is the upward limit on the increase of a handicap index. This next term is probably one that you've heard a little bit more about than maybe some others. It's one that got a lot of intrigue as we announced this new World Handicap system in 2019. And essentially, this is a mechanism that's was already in place in other parts of the world, but was never a part of the USGA handicap system, and that's called the playing conditions calculation. So whereas we rate golf courses under normal course and weather conditions, we all know that the game is played outdoors, and not every day is normal. And so what the playing conditions calculation does is it takes into account the scores that were posted on the day of play, and if they far and away exceed what the expected score range was for the group playing at the golf course, then there's a possibility of an adjustment that'll get made. We'll talk more about this later on. Exceptional score reduction. In the past, we have, when a golfer posts a score, we paid special attention to the score type, whether it was a home, away, but really a tournament score carried a little bit more weight. And I know probably several of you in the audience tonight have at one point had an R next to their handicap index, or maybe you have a buddy that had the R next to their handicap index, and that referred to their handicap index being reduced due to exceptional tournament performance. We used to have a mechanism in the system where if you outperformed your handicap index by 2 or more or 3 more shots in 2 or more tournament rounds, then you would have the possibility of your index being reduced, and it would be denoted with the letter R. Well, that's gone away. When golfers post scores, they still will put their score type in, but it no longer has any direct impact on the golfer's index calculation. However, it's been replaced with what's called the exceptional score reduction. So if a golfer outperforms his or her handicap index in any round, whether it be casual or a tournament, by more than 7 shots, their index is automatically reduced by 1 stroke. And then if they outperform their index by more than 10 strokes, it'll be reduced by 2. So we'll get into an example of that later on. Net double bogey, probably like the playing conditions calculation, is a term that you may have heard a little bit more about. We have always had a maximum score that a golfer could take on any one hole based on his or her course handicap, and that remains true, except we are no longer using equitable stroke control, and instead we're replacing it with net double bogey. So net double bogey is par of the hole plus 2 strokes, double bogey, plus any handicap strokes you may receive on that hole. We'll get into an example or two later on in the presentation to hopefully make some sense of that. And then lastly, net par is the new term for when you are lucky enough to play several holes after work maybe, but you're not able to finish the full 18. If you play 16 holes, it gets too dark to play holes 17 and 18. You're still responsible for posting that 18-hole score, and it's net par for holes 17 and 18 that we record to be able to round out that 18-hole score. Net par is equal to par plus any handicap strokes you would have received on the hole. Concept is unchanged from what we had in the USGA handicap system. However, it is a new term. We used to use it, just call it par plus. Now it's called net par. So that takes us to the end of our first section, just a real brief overview. Connor, just gonna take a quick pause here for a second. Do we have any questions?
No questions so far, Michael.
Excellent. Then we will we'll not stop the train and we'll just keep on moving here. So let's jump into the fundamentals of handicapping, and really before we get into handicapping, so to speak, we want to focus just a couple minutes on course rating, because course rating and handicapping really do go hand in hand. If we didn't have a rating system out there, we wouldn't have a basis by which we could judge each individual score we post on, say, the forward tee versus the back tee at your club, or maybe playing a club across the street versus your home club. So we use the course rating system along with the scores we post in order to achieve what are called score differentials, which we'll touch upon later. But as I mentioned earlier, worldwide, we've adopted the USGA course rating system around the world. So you're going to find if you travel or people coming to the United States, the courses that they've played are all going to have the same types of course ratings and slope ratings that you're accustomed to seeing. Now, a couple of things about rating. We rate for essentially two players. When we rate a golf course, we rate for the scratch golfer and the bogey golfer. More on them in a minute. And within each of those types of players, we have different criteria for men and women. That's why if you were to ever see a golf course with, say, a men's rating and a women's rating from the white tee, they're always going to be different because the criteria we use is very different for men and women. Now, it's a very objective process. We have volunteer teams around the state that take care of this job for us, and they do a fantastic job. And we visit a course generally every 8 years to re-rate. New courses we have to re-rate twice in the first 5 years, or we rate them twice in the first 5 years of existence. Otherwise, the USGA mandates we re-rate every 10 years. We're on an 8-year cycle. And on that one day, we're essentially gathering several measurements on each hole from predetermined locations, and we're looking to identify or evaluate 15 different obstacles as it relates to the playing of the hole. A couple of fixed items that we get from the course include rough height and average green speed, among others, because again, we're only there one day out of 8 years, but we're able to gather all of this data, ultimately come back, and then we were going to get the course rating information. So what it is that we come up with are two numbers that you would see on a scorecard. As I mentioned, we rate for the scratch golfer and we rate for the bogey golfer. So the course rating number that you see on a scorecard, for example here, 71.8, course rating and scratch rating are synonymous terms. This is actually, the course rating is the score that a scratch golfer would expect to shoot on that particular set of tees under normal course and weather conditions. So all the data that we gather up for the scratch golfer when rating a particular set of tees is then relates back to the course rating. We also do get a value for the bogey rating. So a woman with a handicap index of approximately 24, male golfer with a handicap index of 20. However, the bogey rating is not a number that you're ever going to see on any reports that we submit to the club or on the scorecard. Instead, you're going to see a number called slope. And what slope is, it's a relative term. So really what slope tells us is what the relative difficulty of a golf course is, or a set of tees is, for a golfer that's not scratch. So we use both the scratch rating and the bogey rating in determining slope. So the takeaway of this slide is that when you are looking to evaluate the difficulty of any golf course, the one thing we would stress you not do is focus strictly on the slope rating of a number, because it's a relative term. Really, in order to judge the difficulty of a particular set of tees, it's important for you to look at both the course rating and the slope rating to determine its difficulty. And this leads us to our first significant change in the course in the New World Handicap system, and that's going to be in the calculation of a course handicap. So we're ramping up here to talk a little bit about the how course rating is impacted in the handicap system, or it relates to the handicap system. So under the rules of handicapping, a course handicap will be the number of strokes a player receives to play down to the par of the tees being played. This is a significant change. Historically, the course handicap number that you would see at your facility would reference the number of strokes you needed to play down to the level of a scratch golfer, or the course rating from a particular set of tees. And now we're making a fundamental shift to this number being the number of strokes over par you would expect to shoot when playing from a particular set of tees. So as it relates to your handicap index, you may not have seen much change in the World Handicap, when the World Handicap system launched back in January, in your handicap index. And we'll get into that later on. But if you went to your club and you looked at the course handicap from each set of tees, that is where you may have seen the dramatic change. So here, let's look at an example of a male golfer at Riverbend Club, which is going to be the host site of the VSGA Amateur Championship later this summer. And at that particular club, the average male golfer has a handicap index of 15.0. Riverbend Club has 5 different sets of tees rated for men, and The next slide is going to be for women, so you can see that information as well. And par from each set of tees at Riverbend is 71. So that golfer with a 15.0 handicap index, and you can see that the back tee measures just under 7,000 yards, and the forward tee measures 5,200 yards. So a little bit more than 1,700 yards difference between the two. That 15.0 handicap index player from the back tee has a course handicap in our old system of 19, and from the forward tee of 16. So if we just stop there, one of the questions that we got most often in the past was, how is it that there is only 3 strokes difference between the back tee at this club and the forward tee when there's more than 1,700 yards of yardage difference? And our explanation was, well, you're right, it is more than 3 strokes difference difficulty, and because that 19 does not reference how many strokes over par the golfer would expect to shoot. It references the number over the course rating that golfer would expect to shoot. So then we would take the target score, which would be the course rating plus the course handicap, and show the people that, or show that golfer that their course handicap spread, though 3, their target score spread may have gone up to 10. So now, what does this mean in the new world handicap system? This particular golfer would have seen a dramatic change in the calculation of their course handicap now. So whereas before from the back tee, they were a 19, now they're a 22. And whereas before they were 16 from the forward tee, now they're a 12. Why is there such a great difference? Because we're no longer referencing the course rating of a particular set of tees when determining what the course handicap is. We're referencing back to that fixed number of par, okay? So 22 strokes over par is what the golfer would expect to shoot from the back tee, or a target score of 93. And if they play the forward tee, it would be a target score of 83, or 12 strokes over par. So it makes a little bit more sense when you take it out to doing the target score. One of the great things that you're going to see as you begin to play in competitions, especially if you used to play in competitions against people from different sets of tees, is that adjustment we used to make to equate the 2 courses, where we had to take the difference between the 2 ratings and either add or subtract them from golfers' course handicaps. We no longer need to do that because that's already baked into the course handicap calculation. So as we look at the women's information at Riverbend Club, we'll see the average female golfer at that facility has a handicap index of 31.3, and that yields a course handicap now of 44 from the white tees down to a 35. So a 6-stroke spread now, or excuse me, a 9-stroke spread from the white tees to the red tee, as opposed to that 3-stroke spread that it was last year from the white tee to the red tee. A new concept that we have that goes along with this is the playing handicap. And really the reason that we have this new term of playing handicap is to differentiate the handicap we may use when we're playing in a round, maybe playing in a competition, versus the handicap that we use for the posting of scores. So a lot of times a club will use a percentage of course handicap for an event. And we'll actually show you a slide in just a second that shows you what those recommendations are to achieve equity in different formats of play. Now, what that will do is it'll beg the question, what handicap do we use for the purpose of score posting? You know, when I'm playing in a competition, for example, you can see here, this golfer has a course handicap of 15, but when playing in a 4-ball stroke play competition at 85%, their playing handicap is 13. So the golfer may have the question, which handicap do I use for score posting or to make any sort of adjustments? So for the purposes of playing the round, you're going to use the playing handicap. That's the handicap you'll be using for competition. However, when it goes to posting your score, the handicap that you will always use is going to be the course handicap. So you'll be using that full course handicap of 15 to determine, for example, what net par would be for any unfinished holes, or for determining what your net double bogey score would be if you were to have a blow up hole and have a score higher than you would be allowed to post. So let's talk briefly about what the new recommended allowances are. And these are new to this year. We've had allowances in the past. These are based on different formats of play in match play and stroke play. But you may have seen some changes if you were at all familiar with the old recommendations. Moving to this new world handicap system allowed the research team to do a reset and figure out where it is that we can achieve the greatest equity in these different formats of play. And so couple of changes that you may see here, first one would be in 4-ball stroke play. For 4-ball stroke play, the recommended course handicap percentage in the USGA handicap system was 90% for men and 95% for women. And if the two sides differed by more than 8 strokes after that was applied, you would have reduced by an additional 10. That's been changed to a straight 85% for both male and female golfers, and you no longer need to make that additional calculation if the spread of course handicaps is greater than 8. Another thing to highlight is going to be the scramble. People have played scrambles for ages, but that recommendation has never been in the USGA handicap system, partly because it wasn't played in accordance with the rules of the game. However, so many people around the world play that format that you are going to see a recommendation for handicapping a scramble both as a 4-player team and as a 2-player team. So you can see those values in there as well. Now, these are recommendations, so you may find that a competition at your club may use a different value, and that's fine. We're just showing what the recommendations are that'll achieve the greatest equity. Changing gears here, but getting back into that modern and inclusive theme, let's talk about the minimum scores needed to obtain an index for that new golfer. So we really want a golfer that's new to the game or maybe new to handicapping to have access to that system or that index as quickly as possible. In the past, it took a minimum of 5 scores for a golfer to get an 18-hole handicap index, and because we used to revise on the 1st and the 15th of each month, they would sometimes have to wait as many as 14 days until they could get an updated handicap index number after they posted that 5th score. That's no longer the case. For a new golfer, after 3 18-hole rounds or 54 holes of golf, and that can be any mixture of 9 or 18-hole rounds, after 54 holes, a golfer is going to be eligible for a handicap index the next day. Couple recommendations. One, there is no time limit on completing the submission of these scores. We know that the frequency of play for people varies greatly. Some people play 5 times a week. Some people play 5 times a year. So scores are not going to expire. If I post my first round today and I don't post my next round for 3 months, that's okay. However, with new golfers, we do strongly recommend that they record scores hole by hole. And that's going to be a theme. We'll touch upon hole by hole score posting a little bit more this evening. That's going to play a bigger role in this new world handicap system, and you may have already seen that if you've gone to post any scores at all this year. Also, along with that inclusive theme is going to be the change in the maximum handicap index. With the USGA system, we have the handicap limits of 36.4 and 40.4 for men and women respectively, and that's been edited to or changed to 54.0 for both male and female golfers. We found that when looking at handicap rolls, we had several people that were up at those maximum values, and that's just where their ability was. In fact, their ability was a little bit higher than that. What would happen is they would post scores and post scores and post scores and see no movement whatsoever. So now with this new system that allows an index that's significantly higher than we've had in the past, golfers that have higher handicap indexes are going to be able to see some movement, whether up or down, as they continue to play the game. Does that mean that clubs need to use 54.0 in every single one of their competitions? It does not. Clubs are still going to be able to, for purposes of competitions, limit handicap indexes or restrict handicap indexes, whatever they want to do, just like they were able to do in the past. But again, we're just going to allow the calculation of 54.0 to take place for all golfers. Again, trying to be as inclusive and accessible as possible and make it as easy as possible for golfers to obtain and maintain that index. The maximum score for handicap purposes, I mentioned this already. It's going to go from equitable stroke control, which based on your course handicap was a fixed number. Okay, so if you were a 10 to 19 in the past, your max score was a 7. If you were a 40 or more, your max score was a 10. And then if you were somewhere in between, you would either be an 8 or a 9, or if you're a single-digit handicap golfer, the most you could take was a double bogey. That's going to change, And the new max handicap or max score a golfer, any golfer can take on a hole is going to be net double bogey. So here's another instance where golfers are going to have to pay a little bit more attention to where their strokes fall on a scorecard. So what I'm going to show you here is basically what a golfer scorecard would look like and how they would apply net double bogey. So here is Janet Smith. Janet Smith, she is playing on the bronze tees where her course handicap is 18. That means that she gets 1 stroke on every single hole. So when Janet was playing her round this afternoon, on the 17th hole, you can see that she made a score of 8. Well, for Janet, her double bogey on a par 4, the 17th hole is a par 4, so double bogey is a 6. Okay, so that's 2 over par, and Janet gets 1 stroke on every single hole. So her net double bogey score on that hole is 7. However, Janet's actual gross score was an 8. So her gross score, this is not the score she posts, but her gross score, adding up all of her actual hole scores, was a 95. Now, before Janet posts that score, she needs to go through her scorecard and make sure that she didn't exceed net double bogey on any holes. And on 17, she did. So then she needs to make that one adjustment and change that 8 to a 7, and then post the score of 94 for handicap purposes. So we used to always have to do some sort of adjustment in the past, but now instead of it being a fixed number again, it's going to be related to par. Now, one of the nice things about this new system, the new technology piece, is that if you use the MyVSGA app or the GIN app, or if you go online to post scores or even post at the club kiosk at your facilities, and you choose to post hole by hole, the system will make the adjustments for you. You can choose to make the adjustments already, but if you want to put in the raw score, the system will automatically adjust down for net double bogey and post the correct score to your record for handicap purposes. So just know that that's going to be an option for you. Moving on to most likely score. So most likely score would take place when a golfer starts but does not finish a hole. Okay, so think about in terms of playing in a partner competition, whether you call it a 4-ball or a better ball or a 2-man competition, and you and your friend are playing as a team, and your friend has already made a 4, and you are on the putting green but 15 feet away putting for a 5. Well, since you can't beat or tie or beat your partner's score, more times than not, you're going to pick up your ball and you're going to move on to the next hole. But for handicap purposes, you're still responsible for posting that score. So in the past, what we would tell you was in the USGA handicap system is you needed to post a score that you would most likely record or score from that hole more than half the time. So there was a little bit of gray area there and it was open to interpretation. Now with the World Handicap System, we've given golfers a little bit more guidance. So we reference, based on where they are on the hole when they pick up, how many strokes they're responsible for adding to their score. So using the example I just gave you, where the golfer was putting for a 5 from 15 feet, he would need to go to the, or she would need to go to the second row where the golfer's between 5 feet and 20 yards from the hole, and either say they're going to make 2 or 3 additional strokes depending on the position. So probably from 15 feet, they would 2-putt. So instead of writing down just that they made the putt from 15 feet and recording a score of 5, they should record a score of 6. You know, what happens is if golfers go through the process of just giving themselves that 15-footer and then they do it again and again and again, and then before they know it, they've done it 5 or 6 times on any one 18-hole round, now all of a sudden they've got this artificially low score, which is going to bring down their handicap index. So it's important when you don't finish out the hole to use the guidelines set forth the most likely score to get that accurate reading of what your score would have been. And that's a little bit different than hole not played. Hole not played is an example that we referenced in that early on the key definitions. That's when you don't even start the hole. However, when you play around and you finish a certain number of holes, and we'll get to that number in a little bit, you're still responsible for posting either a 9 or an 18-hole score. And the way you would record that score, again, is by using net par, which is equal to par plus any handicap strokes that you would have been entitled to receive on that hole. So using the example of somebody who is an 18 course handicap, they finish 16 holes before it gets dark. They don't play the last 2 holes, which are 2 par 4s. On those particular holes, they would record a score of net par, okay, which would be par plus any handicap strokes. So it would be a 5 on each of those 2 remaining holes. Par of 4 plus the 1 stroke that they would have received on each hole. Fewer than 9 or 18 holes played. So we play 9 holes of golf, we post 9 hole scores. The way 2 9-hole scores are combined, when you post a 9-hole round, that 9-hole score will sit in your record, and it will wait, and it's going to wait for another 9-hole score to be posted. And what will happen is those 2 9-hole scores will combine to create an 18-hole score. And that 18-hole score will be the sum of those 2 9-hole rounds, and the rating will be the sum of the 2 9-hole ratings, and the slope will be the average of the 2 slopes. Now, the nice thing about 9-hole scores is it does not require you to play 2 9-hole rounds at the same facility to combine. You could play the front 9 at your home course tomorrow, and then 3 days later play the back 9 at a course across the street from you, and those 2 will combine to create an 18-hole score. Now, in order for you to be able to post a 9-hole score, you have to play a minimum of 7 holes. That's unchanged from where we were with the USGA handicap system. However, there is a slight change in the posting of an 18-hole score. It now takes a minimum of 14 holes to be able to be eligible to post an 18-hole score. In the past, it took a minimum of 13 holes. So just make note of that. And again, as we talked about earlier, a score of net par must be recorded for the remaining holes. So I'm going to pause here real quick, Connor, to see if we had any questions from the group.
Yeah, Michael, just one thing here, kind of a question comment, but can you touch a little bit more with playing handicaps? There's a notion out there that playing handicap penalizes the higher handicap player more, and how is that considered fair in a competition?
Good. So that's a good question. So these percentages of course handicap are not just arbitrary values that were picked at random. Like I mentioned before, the moving into this new world system allowed the research team, which was composed of members from around the world, to come together to really, when it came to coming up with these recommended allowances, to find where can we achieve equity among all handicap ranges when we're playing in a large size net event. And that is basically using live scores. Those values that you see or saw earlier are where we achieve the greatest equity. So it's not going to be slanted one way or the other. That is just based on data that we're able to come up with equity based on with those values. Hopefully that makes sense. But if you have any further questions, you can certainly reach out to us again. Connor, was there anything else?
Yeah, we had a couple more come in. This next one, can you play alone and post a score?
You cannot. So this was a change that was made several years ago in the USGA handicap system, and y'all may be interested to know we were the only system around the world that allowed, at the time, that had allowed golfers to play by themselves and post scores. So as we think about moving collectively to this world from 6 to 1, and we talk about compromise, that was a beginning stage of that compromise and moving into this new world system. So we are not allowed to play alone and post a score. However, that said, if you go out and play with just as yourself, but have a caddy or have someone with you, you are able to still post that score.
All right, next one here. Do you have to adjust your score when a bunker does not have a rake and you are asked to pull the ball out of the bunker and play from behind the bunker?
So it sounds like in that respect, the club has made bunkers, they have made them obstructions, Connor, or ground under repair. And so they are allowing golfers to take relief without penalty. So in that respect, you would still be responsible for posting the score, yes.
All right, next one here. Will scramble scores be allowed to be posted?
No, scrambles. So some of the finer details that we're not going to cover in this overview tonight are, what type of scores are acceptable but not, and that's a good question. So there are certain formats of play that are not going to be postable. We're going to give recommendations on equity to achieve equity when playing in those types of events. But as far as posting a score, you have to play in the type of format where you're going to finish your own ball during a round. So 4-ball individual play are certainly going to be postable, but when you're playing alternate shot or you're playing in a scramble, you would not be able to post those scores.
All right, next one here, and feel free to plug away, Michael, but basically it comes down to where can you find on either the VSGA website or other means how many strokes you get when playing a particular course?
That's a great question. So there are a few different ways that you can find that information out. First thing you can do, and probably the easiest thing you can do, is to download the My VSGA app, because that is a very easy way to, on the first tee, whether it's just you or you and 3 friends are playing and you want to figure out what everybody's handicaps are from a specific set of tees, you can do that. You can also go to the golfer kiosk at the facility itself. We also have printed reports that are probably hanging by the posting kiosk or in locker rooms or in the golf shop. That'll tell you what your course handicap is. And lastly, you can go online and look it up on vsga.org as well. So if you go to the handicap lookup page, it'll take you to the spot on our website where you can find that course handicap.
All right, next question
Connor?
here. Yeah, you made.
Let's take one more and then we're going to move on because we're running a touch behind. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Is the whole handicap based on difficulty or differential between scores of higher and lower handicaps?
We're going to table that one for a minute because we will get to that at the end of the presentation. All right, so these are great questions, guys, and please keep them coming, and we'll take some more time at the end as well. But I want to get through the next part because we do have some key changes coming up here in the handicap formula. So let's move on here to this index calculation. We've touched upon each of these 5 already, but these are the 5 significant changes to the handicap index calculation for 2020. Minimum of number of scores required has gone from 5 to 3. Although most of our golfers that we see with the handicap index have more than 20 scores in their record. The number of differentials used has changed as well. So in the past, we used the best 10 out of the most recent 20, and that's been changed to the best 8 out of 20. The playing conditions calculation is a part of the score differential equation. We have an exceptional score reduction that considers all scores, not just tournament scores like they had in the past. And then lastly, we have implemented the soft cap and the hard cap to limit the upward movement of a handicap index. So real quick, like I mentioned before, when a golfer plays a particular golf course, there's a difference between the back set of tees and the forward set of tees. And we all understand that if we were to go out and shoot a round of, say, 80 from the back tees versus 80 from the forwardmost tees at a course, we would probably feel like the 80 from the back set of tees is a greater achievement. And that's true. And in fact, the way that we're able to differentiate that in the handicap system is through the differential equation, the score differential equation. So for every round of golf you play, you post that adjusted gross score. And when we say adjusted, we mean for net double bogey. And then the variables that we used in calculating this differential for you every time you play is the slope rating of the tees played and the course rating from the tees played. And the new element is going to be the PCC adjustment. So it's important to understand that a lower score does not always yield a lower differential. So here we've got 3 examples, same golfer, but playing 3 different rounds on 3 different courses. Golfer shoots a 95 on the first course with a 71.5 course rating and 125 slope. That yields a differential of 21.2. moves the next day to another course down the road, plays a harder set of tees with a rating of 73.8140. Golfer shoots a higher score, and you can see how much lower the differential is. So a higher score this time, but a much lower differential. It's a greater accomplishment shooting 97 from that more difficult set of tees. And then lastly, you see the lowest score posted by the golfer of 90, but on the easiest rated set of tees of 66.1105, that yields a differential of 25.7. So that's why when we look at a golfer's handicap index and we were going to focus on any one column on the scoring grid, we recommend that they focus in on that differential, because that's really going to tell the picture. That last bullet point, or that last example, is also how we've got, we're finding ourselves rating far more forward sets of tees for golfers, or for golf clubs rather, now, because people have taken advantage of the Tee It Forward initiative, and they're playing those forward sets of tees. Now, what we'll see is those forward sets of tees will have much lower ratings, and we can have golfers that have scoring averages of, say, 78, 79, 80, 81, and yet their handicap index is still in the low teens. And people will ask, how is that even possible? And the reason being is spelled out in the differential formula, that the ratings that they're playing are so low that even that lower score is still going to yield a differential that's in the teens. We talked about 8 out of 20, moving from 10 out of 20. If you were at all familiar with our old formula, it was 10 out of the best 10 score differentials out of the most 20 rounds. So what'll happen is that as you have 20 rounds in your record, the oldest score will cycle out when you post the next score. We're now focusing in on 8, and we're no longer taking that 96% bonus for excellence that we're used to. It's just a straight 8 out of 20 average. So if we look at two scoring records side by side, they're identical, whereas one is a USGA Handicap Index System calculation from last year, and now we have on the right, the blue shaded is the World Handicap System calculation from January of 2020. Same scoring record yields a different result, and that was to be expected. And you probably noticed that when we went to this new system, that you saw a slight change, and that's because we're no longer looking at 10 scores, we're looking at 8, and we're no longer taking 96%. Okay, so some people saw their indexes go down a little bit. Those are people that may have been fairly steady players, so they didn't have a lot of fluctuation. And when you remove that 96%, then their index goes up a tad. Whereas some players saw their index go up or down a little bit, and that's because they were a little bit more variable. So maybe their 9th and 10th lowest scores were significantly higher than some of their lower scores, and now when you average a lower number, it's a little bit more impacted. So there's no rhyme or reason, but everybody probably saw some sort of minor change in their index calculation. PCC, we touched on this earlier. The one thing I want to stress from this slide is that playing conditions calculation, this is based exclusively on scores posted on the day of play. We've been receiving probably more questions on this than any other element of the New World Handicap System. People are wondering how it's done, or who's doing it, or why it's not being done on certain days at their club. And basically what PCC is, it's people will post scores on the day of play, and we have an expected scoring range of all those people that would have that posted their scores. And if the actual scores posted by that group that posted that day exceeded their expected range by a good degree, then there will be some sort of adjustment. Okay, as I said earlier, when we rate, we rate based on normal course and weather conditions, and not every day is normal. So we use scoring data. We don't use any weather data. We don't have anybody at the club tracking what the wind speeds were, or what the rain gauge says, or anything like that. We use scores only to determine whether or not PCC gets kicked in. And we would expect to see PCC maybe 10 to 15% of all rounds. It's going to be simple and conservative in nature. And it's always, the adjustment's going to be a whole number. It'll be identified in your scoring grid, so you'll know the next day if there was a PCC added to your score. And the range is a -1, meaning the course played a little bit easier that day, all the way up to a +3, which means that it played significantly more challenging than the ratings. But as I said, most of the rounds are going to have no adjustment at all. Now, a few notes to make about PCC. It's performed once a day. So at the end of the day, after all scores have been posted, we will take a snapshot at about midnight of the scores posted to determine whether or not PCC is going to kick in. It includes all golfers that played that day from all rated tees in both genders. We require at least 8 acceptable scores to be submitted by players with an index of 36.0 or below. So if we only have 10 players on the course tomorrow, and at the end of tomorrow, only 6 of them posted, guess what? There's no PCC, because we need at least 8 scores posted by the end of tomorrow to determine whether PCC is going to kick in. Now, if we have 10 people play tomorrow, 8 post, and it's determined that there's a +1, the system will retain a memory of the fact that there was a +1 PCC. And when the other 2 golfers go back in a few days later maybe and post their scores, it will automatically add the +1 to their score. But it's important for golfers to get in that habit. So if we're talking about new habits, golfers really need to get in that habit of posting as soon as the round is over. Whereas in the past, it wasn't as important to do that. It's applied to a calculation of all score differentials for all players and includes both 9 and 18 hole acceptable scores. So I think by now everybody should understand the importance of getting those scores posted in as soon as possible after the round is played. So they're not only like we've always had, which is so they're available for peer review, but because PCC is only calculated that one time, you want to make sure that your score is in there and able to be included in determining whether or not it's going to be a part of it. And what will happen is the next day, if you play today and you post today, tomorrow morning when you wake up, you will have a new handicap index. So in the past, we revised handicaps on the 1st and the 15th of each month, and now we have handicaps daily, provided that you played the previous day. So it should go without saying that players need to get the scores in as soon as possible. And then again, there's always the handicap index can be revised by a committee adjustment if need be. Changing gears here to exceptional score reduction. I'm going to kind of, we're getting pressed for time here, Connor. So a couple more slides here that we'll kind of go through a little bit more quickly because this won't kick in all that often, and we've already explained it a little bit. But exceptional score reduction, again, this applies to all scores. So everybody will occasionally have that career round, all right? And that's okay, and the system, but what will happen with the system is if you outperform your index in any casual round or competitive round by at least 7 shots, what will happen is your index will automatically be adjusted down by 1 stroke. And if you outperform your handicap index by 10 or more shots, then you'll be reduced by 2 strokes. So what that's going to look like, and this is just a sample here, is if you're looking at a scoring record, and you can see in this particular case, the golfer's got a handicap index probably somewhere in the low teens, and then all of a sudden shoots a score with a differential 4.1. Let's say that score is 7 strokes lower than their index. What's going to happen is their index will go down by a stroke. And so the way we're going to do that is we will subtract 1 from each of the 20 score differentials that were used in that golfer's handicap index calculation. The effect of that is that the index goes down by 1 stroke. And so what will happen is those new adjusted differentials will stay with that golfer until they cycle out as that golfer posts more scores. So you can see moving on, this particular golfer, as he or she posts future scores, does not have that reduction. But you can see again later on, maybe the golfer has another exceptional round, and at that point in time, he or she will experience another 1-stroke adjustment. Now, what will happen with these remaining scores down here that are still part of his or her most recent 20, they will get reduced again. It's a cumulative effect, but again, at the time, it's just going to be a 1-stroke adjustment. We touched earlier about the memory of the low index. So we're looking at that low handicap index, and you may have already noticed that you have a low handicap index when you're looking at your handicap either on the app or online. You may have noticed that there's that extra number that wasn't there in the past. And so every time your index is calculated, we're reviewing your low index to see if a new one needs to be calculated. And you should know that index can't go up by more than 5 strokes over that rolling 365-day period. And the way that we are going to police their, or essentially the mechanism that we're going to use to be able to keep that handicap index under 5 above your low index is by using either both the soft cap and the hard cap. So real quick, we're going to go through a couple of examples of each, and just know that no one person has to do this math for you. It is an automatic function of the system. So the player A has a low index of 10.0 and his current 8 out of 20 average is 15.2. So what we're doing in the system is we let a golfer's index go up by 3 strokes without any sort of impediment by the system. But anything more than that, the soft cap will be applied. So here we can see that the difference between his low index and the current index is 5.2, which is more than 3 strokes difference. So what we do is we allow the golfer 50% of that difference. So 50% of 2.2 is 1.1 strokes. So when we add 3.0 to 1.1, that gives us 4.1. So that golfer's new adjusted handicap index is 14.1. And if you ever have the soft cap applied to you, just know that there will be a little icon in your scoring record to let you know of that. And then if you have a low index of 10, and let's say that you've experienced a rough patch and you're starting to play a little bit worse than you have over the course of the last year, your new index is 17.4. The way the hard cap is going to work is we'll first calculate the soft cap. So when we calculate the soft cap for this golfer, it takes us to 15.2. But as I mentioned, you can't have any more than a 5-stroke increase over your low index, which you can see 15.2 is more than 5 strokes greater than 10. So the way the hard cap will work is it will simply take that 15.2 and just put a hard cap on it of 5 strokes, or take it down to a 15.0. So I know those are 2 very quick examples, but I'm going to pause here to Connor to see if we had any questions about the index calculation.
Just one quick question that's in here. When posting scores, what's the difference between home and away? They're not sure what to post.
Okay, so as I mentioned, it's not as important as it was in the past in determining your actual calculation. However, the score types are used typically by either administrators at your club or competition administrators to see any maybe out of sorts scoring patterns. But to answer the question specifically, the home score would be the score that you've posted from a course where you maintain your handicap index. So if your handicap index is maintained at XYZ Golf Club and you play around at XYZ Golf Club, that score should be posted as a home score. And when you play anywhere else, as long as it's not a competition, you would post those scores as away scores. Any other questions, Connor?
Just one real quick. Will these presentation slides be available to attendees anywhere, or what other further education? I think you have a slide on that later on.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a slide later on. We're recording today's presentation, so we'll at some point make these recordings available, and we'll make some version of this information available to people as well. Any other questions real quick, Connor?
Will we have any more of these WHS webinars in the future, or
Great questions. So this is our first this is us dipping our toe into the water of webinars. We did 2 Rules of Golf workshops, and we've done 2 WHS seminars, and we've had great success. It's a wonderful opportunity to reach a lot of people with and it's pretty easy to do. So I definitely foresee us doing more of these in the future. We just don't have any on the books as of yet. So I do want to touch on a couple more things, and then get you all off to enjoy the rest of your evenings. At least here in Richmond, I know the sun's out and it's a nice night for a walk. But we'll tie up a few loose ends here, and then get you on your way. So stroke index allocation. I do want to say that this is, when we come out and rate a golf course, this was always something that we would get feedback from clubs and members of the clubs, where we would submit to the club the course handicap tables, we would give them the new rating certificates, and we would always inevitably get the question, what are our new handicap holes? And our response was always, well, actually, that's not a part of the course rating process. That's actually something, and this goes to the question that was asked earlier, that relates back to scoring data. There's an analysis that you can do based on scores captured by golfers at your club. Well, the recommendation in the World Handicap System for determining stroke indexes has changed, or the handicap strokes on a given course has changed, and we now use course rating data. Now, these are recommendations, so that means that if your club doesn't change its stroke index holes this year, it doesn't mean that those aren't any less correct than they were last year. It's perfectly fine for clubs to keep the stroke index holes they currently have as long as they want. But if the club decides it's time for them to do new allocations, we have a new recommended method for achieving that. So what we do is we actually will supply each club on request with the information based on the data that we collected while rating the golf course, essentially comparing the scratch golfer to the bogey golfer on each hole and figuring out where the biggest difference factors are, the greatest expected score differences from each group on each hole, and that's going to determine how we allocate the strokes in the scorecard. Now, taking it a step further, we actually have some additional guidelines in the new system that we didn't have in the past. So we always recommended that odd strokes be on one side, evens on the other, and that's going to continue. However, we've actually taken it a little further, and now what we're doing is we are grouping each 9 holes into 3 9-hole clusters or triads, where in each group or each triad, you're going to have 1 low handicap hole, 1 mid-range handicap hole, and 1 high handicap hole, so that we are spreading strokes across the entire 9 holes. So if golfers are only getting 1 or 2 or 3 strokes, they're not going to get them bunched up in a row. So that's going to be the format that we would supply those recommendations to a club in. And a club is free to make any sort of adjustments that they want. These are simply, like we mentioned, recommendations. So any clubs that are out there wanting this data or information, certainly contact us offline, and we'll be happy to provide that to them. Just a couple more things I want to talk about, and as I mentioned, this is going to be a little bit more relevant to where we are today with the game, and we have found that though we are struggling through some challenging times, that for many, golf has been an escape, a chance to get some exercise on the course. We're certainly encouraging people that they choose to play the game to be safe, and we've found through surveys that our clubs are doing a fantastic job of promoting that. Now, one way that they are doing so is using a little bit of ingenuity in how they cut their holes, or modifications to the holes that they've made. Here are 3 examples. One is the top picture is where clubs use a pool noodle so that the golf ball doesn't go all the way down. The second we found a lot of clubs are doing, which is not putting the hole liners all the way down, so the ball never really comes to rest in the hole. It actually just bounces off the hole liner and the golfer picks it up. And then the last example is where a club has taken a small piece of PVC pipe and just put it in the hole with the same sort of goal as the first picture, where the ball will fall just below the surface of the ground but won't go all the way to the bottom. So again, clubs are trying to limit those contact points for their golfers. The USGA has come out with some guidelines for posting scores when clubs have made these modifications. It's just temporary, so that when a club is doing this, we are still going to post scores. So we want to put that out there first and foremost. If your club has made modifications to the holes, and of the clubs that we've surveyed, probably 95% of them have made some sort of modification to the holes, you are still responsible for posting scores, and you would simply use the most likely score guidelines to determine the number of strokes you would likely be required to complete that hole. So if you have a putt that's coming up very slowly to a cup with a raised liner, and it just glances off that liner and comes to rest maybe 3 to 6 inches away, you can consider that particular ball hold. But if you have a putt that's coming in at 100 miles an hour and it bounces off 5 feet away, we would not consider that ball hold, and then you would simply use most likely score at that point. But certainly check out that guidance that we have on our website. If you haven't been to vsga.org yet in the last 6 weeks or so, we do have a lot of resource information, not just in posting scores and handicapping, but other governmental updates, updates for our events, and some other good, useful information. We're updating that constantly, so certainly check back on that. But we do have specific guidance on handicapping there too. And then finally, additional education. On our website, we do have a page devoted to the World Handicap System. Hopefully many of you have had an opportunity to visit it. We have there a full version of the Rules of Handicapping. Encourage you to download it. If you are like the book in the hand and you don't want to print out the PDF, that's great too. You can certainly order the book from the USGA directly. It's relatively inexpensive. We also have the key changes document that is part of the handouts that are a part of tonight's presentation. And then we have several infographics, which are little posters that you can print off for your facilities. We have videos that supplement them. So if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the things we talked about tonight, we have some really short videos that are available. And then once we get back to a little bit more normal times, we will resume some our app club seminars. So if this is something that's interesting to you and you want to see a little bit more about this in a longer version or a longer format, we do half-day workshops related to the rules of handicapping. So with that, Connor, I will ask you one last time tonight if we have any questions of the audience.
We have 2 left.
Okay.
So if you belong to multiple clubs, do you choose one of those as your home club?
If you belong to multiple clubs, for the purposes of a score type, they would both be home scores.
All right, and second question here, since you're now collecting scores hole by hole, can you use that information, can you or a club use that information for better or more accurate stroke allocation indexes?
Well, the data would be available, but that would no longer be the recommended method. So I'm not sure if, I mean, a club could certainly, if the club has decided that they want to use scoring data by their club members to allocate stroke holes, that information would be available. However, it would no longer be the recommended method if it came to that point. Again, using course rating data is the way we would be looking to do that in the future. Anything further, Connor?
That is all.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, I know we went a little bit over time, everybody, and it looks like most of you stayed on, and I greatly appreciate that. We tried to put as much content into a little bit of time as possible. Again, we greatly appreciate you spending the last hour plus with us. It's been a great opportunity for us to share a little bit more about the World Handicap System with you all. Again, on behalf of the VSGA, we wish you continued safety and all the best in 2020, and we hope to see you all out on the course. Thanks so much, Connor. And any parting words?
Yep, just echoing what you said, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
All right, everybody. Have a great night, and thank you.